In this video, we're going to talk about the most destructive belief that any person can possibly hold. And this is something that I've been thinking about for a while, and I was actually a little bit surprised by the thoughts that came into my head while considering this. But after some time going over the reasons and rationale as to why I thought this, I was like, it makes a whole lot of sense. So, just so you know right off the bat, the most destructive belief that any person can hold is that other people are bad. And you can put whatever word you want to into this, such as evil, villainous, greedy, selfish, or even stupid, because all of these words lead us to prejudge others or to judge them and keep them in particular pockets, which is actually very self-destructive for us. So we're ruining our lives by actually thinking these things, and I'm going to go into more detail on why that is in the rest of this video. Definitely consider your own life and how these kinds of thoughts have influenced you, and see if it matches into my descriptions of why this belief is so damaging to us as individuals and us as a society. So the main reason that this is self-destructive is because it's socially isolating, and we are social creatures. So by judging other people and labeling, like all men are X, all white people are X, all people of color are X, or whatever, any label you would want to put on it, you're separating yourself from other people. And when you do that, you limit the amount of opportunity you have to actually make a connection. And we humans can generally accomplish way more together than we can ever do on an individual level. And I know so many people who believe that ultimate independence is the way to go, and I'm here to tell you that is not the case. I know that sometimes it feels like you can only count on yourself, but when you can only count on yourself, you can only accomplish so much, because you only have so many talents, you only have so much time in the day, versus when you have a team around you, the amount you can accomplish together is so much greater. It is not 1 + 1 when you have two people together. It's times, it's multiplication. So you get double the output generally than you would have gotten as an individual. And that's one of the reasons why I think relationships exist, because we know when a man and woman come together, for example, you can produce a child, meaning that 1 + 1 = 3 somehow. For whatever reason, that's how it works, biologically speaking. So we have to recognize that there is an aspect of life which is social and that requires the other in order to make us better and to make what we can accomplish greater. So that's the biggest reason, I'd say, why the belief that other people are bad is so self-destructive. Now, another thing that this belief does is it actually prevents improvement, both in yourself, the other person, and in society at large. Because instead of actually treating the issue, instead of approaching the situation going, okay, how are we going to fix this? We then just shunt people off into a box. Like if somebody commits a crime, we put them into jail. And while that may fix the problem temporarily because they're not on the streets, it doesn't actually fix the psychological problem. And that's why people who go to jail tend to offend again. They repeat the damage that they've already done. And part of that is because there is a stigma once they get out to where they no longer have the same opportunities they had beforehand. So now it's even harder for them to create any semblance of a life than it was before they went into prison. But it's also because we're not teaching them new ways to approach life. We're not teaching them new skills. We're not teaching them how to overcome the issues that led to that behavior. And that's one of the ways in which improving our social environment would change society as a whole. Because by not allowing those behaviors, by making them less acceptable, which they are acceptable right now, I know that you don't think so, but they are acceptable right now given the prevalence. By changing that, by teaching the new skills, by showing people there's another way, we can eliminate these entirely from our society. But it does require us to change our own mental perspectives. For example, if somebody commits rape, which I personally think is like the worst crime anybody can do, we tend to accept the word of the woman over the man. Let's say the man's the perpetrator. Now, whether this happened or not, we almost universally accept the word of the woman. But in a truly community environment, both parties, no matter whether this actually happened or not, are going to be sent into a therapy type environment, because either way, there's going to be a problem that needs to be dealt with. Because if the woman lied, she needs therapy to figure out why it is she lied and how to get past whatever mental block's going on. And if the man raped, then he needs psychological training in order to ensure that doesn't happen again. And she needs psychological training to help her get past the trauma of the event. And if the woman lies, then the man has to deal with the impact of that as well, and the judgment that's likely to come from his community. So any way you look at it, all of these events that we tend to label one person with are actually cumulatively impacting, where they usually affect multiple people, and then they kind of branch out as well. So you wind up with kind of a community in pain rather than individuals in pain. And it's not good, I'd say, for anybody necessarily to be in pain. But in these types of situations, we treat half the problem at best, if we treat it at all. And the reason for that is because we label people as bad rather than just labeling them as hurt. And when you label somebody as hurt, you start to look for a solution. Whereas if you label somebody as bad, it's kind of like saying, you cannot change, so we just need to get rid of you. And that's problematic, because now we're filled with fear that somebody will determine that we're bad and throw us out of the community. So we need to embrace a sense of connectivity, and we need to consider that people aren't bad, they're just misunderstood, or they're hurting, or something else that allows us to feel sympathy and then aid them in becoming a more acceptable version of themselves. And that's one of the reasons why this belief is also very damaging and self-destructive, because now we're afraid of receiving the same treatment we give to somebody else. This is also why it's bad to judge people, because when you judge, who do you think feels most judged in the end? So if I become highly judgmental, I feel judged way more, versus when I can be accepting of other people where they're at, I feel accepted. And this is an interesting psychological phenomenon that I can't fully explain, but that does tend to be how it works. Now, there's a third reason this belief is also very destructive, and that's because it creates cynicism, where you go out into the world and you start to see all of these bad people, and you become overwhelmed by their prevalence. And you're like, there's so many bad people, there's no hope for humanity. When in reality, you're only seeing the bad people because of your expectation, and because they tend to be a little bit louder than the good people, quote good people, because good people, same thing. You can't just label somebody good, because they're not just all good. Everybody has the potential to be ultimately good and ultimately bad, and the circumstances are primarily what determines that. So we can't just keep labeling people these things, partly because of this draw towards cynicism. When we do, we tend to look at the world and say there's good and there's bad, when in reality there's just a whole lot of gray. There's not black and white, there's just gray, varying shades of gray, and you get to pick which path you follow. But when you choose to view the negativity, when you choose to see the world as black and white and focus on the black, you see a lot more. You see a lot more of that negativity, you see a lot of that dark, you see a lot more of that pain than you would have if you recognized that it's all just within a spectrum, and that it can flip-flop one way or the other. And by focusing on that dichotomous view, you are blinded actually to the potential for improvement and the potential for growth and the potential of a better world. So you become highly cynical, you tend to become more negative, and when you become more negative, your body actually responds badly to that as well. So you become more susceptible to illness, you become more stressed, and you become less hopeful, meaning that you're likely going to deal with depression as well. So all of these things can be a result of this belief that people are bad rather than hurt or in pain or in need of help. Because instead of fixing the problem, we're just pointing it out and saying, look at how bad it is, look at how awful life is. And that ultimately is just not helpful to any of us, because it doesn't allow that room for growth or that room for change or the possibility of even a better life, because we can only reach something when we believe it's possible. So that's probably one of the big aspects that I would encourage people to look at in particular, whether you believe in a more dichotomous world or not, because that cynicism is a shockingly powerful thing. And I would say that cynicism is only the second step in personal development, your perspective, Jordan Peterson also describes this in some of his works, where he talks about how you move from naivete into cynical stages, and then eventually you move into like a chosen naivete, where you choose to look at the world and see the possibilities despite the fact that you know you can be stabbed in the back. And that is quite the step to take. And I feel like I've gotten to that phase, which is not to say that I'm beyond personal growth. Like, there's still work I have to do. Just that when I look at the world, I don't see bad and good, and I'm fully aware of how dark things can be, and yet I believe that there's hope. And that, I'd say, is ultimately what we all need to be moving towards, because the only way to bring out the best in somebody else is to allow them the opportunity to show you their best by giving them the opportunity. So I know it's a little bit challenging. I know that it's not necessarily the easiest thing to wrap your head around, but just sit with it for a little while and tell me what you think, because ultimately I do think this will help you and your life and improve our society as a whole. Because if we can continue to see the hope for our world despite the darkness, we move closer to it, rather than when we get stuck in cynicism, we actually create the darkness that we hate. So consider that.